So, the funny thing about digital is it's probably the most personal or intimate way to reach somebody. I mean, you're reaching us through, right now, I'm talking to somebody through their computer or their phone. But the really weird thing is from like the dawn of digital advertising, we've been obsessed with targeting. Like, how do we get to this sliver of our audience? And somehow that's the victory. And it's not a victory because what I'm seeing and what I'm feeling from a brand and how I'm engaging, like that's really what the goal is, right? So we're going to talk a little bit today. I've got a great panel about how do we bring sort of the soul to digital advertising and how they've gone about creating this sort of feeling. And we're going to talk about what to do and also what not to do, which is always super fun. So I'm going to introduce the panel. So I'm Ken, by the way. I'm the U.S. editor of The Drum, and with me I have Sam Nyberg. He's Senior Manager, Global Digital Experiences at McCormick & Company. I have Megan Johnson, Global Head of Agency Ecosystem at Mondelez International, and Jürgen Castro, who is VP of Digital Marketing at Imri. So I'm just going to throw it out to the group. I'm going to start with Sam because you're the first on my list here, so you're it. When you talk about bringing, sort of soul and feeling to digital advertising, especially now during COVID when we're all home and it's more important than ever, what are some of the things that you're doing at McCormick and some of the best practices that you've seen or felt or done?
Yeah, and first of all, I mean, we're lucky in that the category we're in, right? Food, I mean, I would argue feeds the soul, and we experience memories through food. We travel through food, and that's especially now through COVID. I mean, food is that connector between people as well. So I think it's a great opportunity for us, to leverage digital to get closer with what we're really good at, which is really flavor, and we're a flavor company. We deliver products, but it's more than that. And I think like with this environment and increasing use of programmatic media, machine learning, algorithms, it's very easy for us as marketer to also become artificial and disconnected from our consumers. So I think what we try to do and really pushing the boundaries about is like, how do we stay true to the consumer? Technology is a way for us to connect with them. It's not a barrier. But it starts with that consumer need. Are we adding value to the consumer? And like you said, we can connect more on a one-to-one level than we've ever been able to, right? That's a real opportunity that we're super excited about.
Great. So Megan, what do you think about this concept of adding, sort of soul to what Mondelez does, and what are some of the things that you've sort of rallied around and use as your North Star when doing so?
Yeah, no, I love it. And Sam, I love your reference to McCormick really having that flavor. So I work for Mondelez, and for those of you who don't know, it's a $26 billion company housing some of the world's most iconic brands: Oreo, Cadbury, Trident. The snacks, the craveable snacks that you really love and you're really after. Mondelez has always sort of tested out where digital should play a role in a brand experience. You can look no further than Oreo Dunk in the Dark, which happened in 2013 and launched, I think, 1,000 war rooms across the country. But since then, we have really taken some time to evolve and codify our approach to digital. And with that, we have a big focus on personalization at scale. Why personalization at scale? Well, we know that personalized ads perform much better than non-personalized ads for our ROI. It's because it brings increased relevancy. It's because it brings an increased distinctiveness in a really, really cluttered environment. But what we found out is that we actually were missing a trick. For all the success that we had in a lot of the cases, we saw that the work was really losing the spark, the soul, as you would say, Ken, and really losing that creativity that made our brands so special and really had that emotional connection in with consumers. What we found is that we had over-indexed on a love of data and tech and the ability to segment people down into the finest amount. And we forgot about the creative expression of an idea and really that hook that would bring it in. So we are now actually in the process, and I think today might even be the official day of it, of launching empathy at scale. which allows us to really refocus our approach to personalization to make sure that we are having human conversations, human connections with people, and that we're maintaining that creative idea as we're talking to people on a more of a one-to-one level.
Terrific. Empathy at scale. Love it. So Jürgen, tell us a little bit about, what you've done for your clients and kind of your feelings on this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, at Emory, we're a mid-sized integrated marketing agency. So our roots are in PR. We dove into social very early on, and everything that we do is kind of rooted in those two practice areas. And so for us, it's always been about starting with the personal experience. What are we trying to communicate, and how is somebody going to experience it within the channel? And so our approach has always been a little bit unique in that we weren't trying to take big creative campaigns and translate them into social or into digital channels. We always started with, well, what is the optimal experience somebody can have within the channel? And then how do we translate what the brand is trying to communicate to that level? So sometimes we took pieces from advertising, sometimes it was from the comm side, and a lot of the time it was whole cloth, having to create something new that could live within these channels and be welcome there and not stick out like a sore thumb. And I think, something that's happened over time is, we have fallen in love, as Megan said, with a lot of like the targeting and the personalization and, the micro segments that we can create. And what we as an agency have really tried to do is to try to bring some creativity back to it and really, again, stay rooted within what is that end consumer experience that is going to deliver the most value, not only for the brand, but also for the person on the other side. Personalization definitely is part of it. Getting a personalized offer or finding out about something that you didn't know that you wanted or needed is always great. But it's not, in today's day and age, that happens all the time. Like, it's not the end all be all anymore. And so I think the creativity of it and how that is presented and how that comes to life is becoming really important again.
Yeah. I think we're all in agreement. Sometimes it can be too targeted, too cold, too scientific almost. But so let's talk a little bit about, one of the things that's interesting about McCormick and Mondelez is how do you kind of get to the consumer in more of this, like almost DTC way? Like, how do you engage them more now that, obviously there's still the great retail outlets and channels and traditional ways that we're always going to do it. We'll always have their success. But, what are some of the learnings that you've had during this experience, during, the pandemic, and, and what can we learn from them? What is everybody watching from home? What are some best practices that, or even, some things that you learned along the way that you shouldn't do? And again, I'll go back to you, Sam, since you're first for the list, and then I'll open it up after this, so I don't keep calling on you first.
Yeah, and I especially with walled gardens and the increased height of those walled gardens, I think COVID just accelerated this. I mean, one of the things we've learned, and like you said, Kenneth, it's not about changing our business model completely. We'll continue to do the tried and true. We'll continue to work with our retail partners, with the platforms. But it also means that we can't put all of our eggs in that basket. And I think the DTC model is, and a lot of brands are talking about it, like how do we build these direct relationships where we generate and we leverage our own first-party data. But the only way we can do that is if we have a value proposition that warrants that direct interaction. Because we know this. Consumers, they don't want to go to each brand for one thing. So the way we're thinking about it is, how do we offer that complementary and incremental value to the consumer that they maybe can't find in store? And that could be both a product, but it could also be, services, experiences, etc., or a combination of the two. So I'll be honest, we're still in the infancy of this. We're definitely scaling up, and we have very aggressive targets for DTC. Our focus right now have been on complementary products, and I think one success story there that I think stumbled into more so than anything else, and it wasn't a pure DTC play, but it might as well have been, was in January of last year we launched Old Bay hot sauce, and if you guys are aware, Old Bay is it's a regional, especially around here in the Mid-Atlantic, right? Very high brand loyalty type of brand, and we put out this limited batch, and like I said, they did have some retail presence as well, and just blew up. And honestly, we were out of stock in days, if not, shorter than that. And I think that was part of it, right? If you have that value proposition, and DTC works perfectly there because it is one of those like destination type objects and products. And actually, I'm really excited. We're not bringing that back. It is in market now as a continuous item, right? But it was that push. But ultimately, that is the question, right? Like, how do we offer enough value to warrant that interaction, that engagement? And then how do we do so in a meaningful and ongoing manner? Because we can do novelty things and you get this one-offs, right? But we're all in the business of building loyalty. We're all in the business of building repeat. So that's really what we're trying to crack the nut on. Like, what is that magic formula? And I think part of that magic formula is testing, right? And being agile about it. But how do you build that value proposition so it makes sense for someone to come to you? Because it's, a relationship is built based on that mutual value exchange, and you can't get away from that. Terrific.
Huge Old Bay fan. If you're making crabs at home, you put crabs in the pot, Old Bay, and a can of beer, and
it's perfect on French fries. And if you haven't tried the hot sauce, I would definitely do it.
Yes, it's a seafood secret. So Megan, tell us a little bit about some of your.
Sure, and Sam, maybe we can get a hot sauce Oreo collab going and really make it fly. But I think you're right. The value is such a key word, and I think it's only really increased with COVID. We've seen with consumer behavior over the last year really accelerate, where people have all of a sudden experienced an entire brand journey simply online, and that's totally different than when you have people that are shopping, in the store aisles. What that means is, as brands, we really need to make sure that our digital experience is of the same quality, is having that same sort of impact that you have with brands when you may be in the store. And that's really a big shift. And it means doubling down on the quality of your assets. So really making sure that even the banner ad that you have or the Instagram story is of that same quality, is really something that can be or wants to be engaged with a consumer. And that intentional focus, I think, is what's really important, and what has become even more so important as more people have been moving into e-commerce DTC channels. Now, as CPG as well, we're not COVID vaccination companies, right? We don't need to exist for a consumer. So when you start talking about what is the value that you provide, it's really getting into where a brand can play within someone's life, within someone's day-to-day. We've had some great examples at Mondelez over the past year, whether it's Oreo providing some playfully connected games at home with people, or Cadbury moving their Easter egg hunt to an online virtual space. So really finding ways that authentically our brands and their purposes can play in people's lives, and making sure that those experiences are accessible within a digital environment.
Great. So Jürgen, tell me a little bit about some of the things that you've done with your clients that kind of fit right into what we've been talking about with bringing this all to life.
Yeah, I think for us, it's interesting because especially right after the shelter at home kind of started to happen, our first kind of mobilization was around, is there anything in market that could be considered insensitive? And I think that that's something that is sometimes lost in the digital landscape, is you have the ability to be real time and really personalized, but that can also carry some risks in that the expectation is that you're reacting in the moment to things as they're happening, and so it was a good and risky thing. We were able to evaluate all of the advertising, all of the communications that we had in market, and pull anything that could be insensitive, anything about gatherings or, anything about touching, and anything that was basically against all the things you were being told to do. We pulled very quickly just to make sure that we were being sensitive and reframed it in other ways. I think for us, we have seen that there's been a huge shift online, which everyone has seen. Early on, we started to benchmark it just in terms of how ads were performing. and just the huge spikes in engagement that we saw. It was obviously a huge opportunity there. But I think what we also have seen is that that's not a unique insight. Everyone caught that at the same time. Everyone saw the same data immediately. And so it became kind of the same competition, right? So what looked at first to be, oh, here's an opportunity, people are spending more time online, quickly became as competitive as any other landscape, as competitive as a mall or, you know, the store shelf, in terms of anything could grab anyone's attention at any moment. And I think that's a lot of brands, I think, that have really done well are the ones that have realized, like, you have to translate your brand story, your brand experience, and you have to have a brand story, you have to have a brand experience, even in the digital space, right? I think that's what we've all been saying, is you have to give people a reason to care. They have to give people a reason to choose you, your products, your services. And sometimes it's as easy as, you know, saving people time or saving people money, but it does really still make a difference if you connect with people on a personal level with the story that they care about. And I think that's something that we need to start bringing forward back into digital again, is it's not just convenience, it's not just frictionless, it's also storytelling that still matters in the space.
Perfect. Yeah. So I think there's obviously been a lot, but there's two things I'd like to unpack. And then for everyone at home, at the end of this session, each of our panelists is going to offer one actionable insight that you can, you know, use or be inspired by. But the two things that really interested me was the concept of a value exchange. And the second thing, and I'll just to tee everyone up, was the thing that we touched on walled gardens and data, but we'll get to that next. But before we go there, you know, so the value exchange for the consumer at home, you know, with the brand in this environment, you know, you're connected, where, you know, it is this, you know, sort of digital moment, this intimate moment. You know, what does a brand need to do to succeed? And I'll just throw this out to the group. I'm done calling on everyone, but if whoever wants to jump in and by all means, you know, have a you know, piggyback off of each other and whatnot.
I think brands need to stay true to their principles, true to the area that they can really play in. You know, we had and I think too, and I think this dovetails with Jürgen's point, that you need to champion the creativity powered by data and technology rather than the other way around, because that's really what's going to be the connection, that's going to be the hook, that's going to be the value that you can really give to consumers. You know, in India with Cadbury, we recently had a case study with Diwali, which is super interesting, where traditionally the sort of women of the household give out little gifts for Diwali. And because of this year, of course, shopping was a completely different experience for these people. And what's interesting about India is that the small businesses there don't really have a digital footprint. Unless you're walking by, you know, the store in front of it, you don't really know it exists. So what Cadbury decided to do, and playing within their realm of generosity, because that's really what drives the brand, that's the principles that they bring. They flipped their advertising to geolocate the small businesses that were in the area, to layer in a dynamic ad that would switch in when a small business was close to you, and to show what little gifts, right, you could be bringing to the Diwali celebration, right? Of course, a Cadbury as well. But what that allowed to do was actually to provide small businesses that boost. I think they had a 10% increase in revenue for that time period. It was a boost to Cadbury and the generosity brand, but it was also very useful. It was the value exchange with the consumer that was above and beyond just an ad for chocolate that someone might be able to see. So I think doing that through the lens of creativity powered by data and tech, rather than the other way around, is what was really successful.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, you know, one of the key components of that too is understanding your customer, and also I think not just the end customer, but, you know, the businesses that you partner with is so important. I think we talk a lot about data, but what I feel sometimes gets lost in that conversation is the point of the data. right? Is it to simply gain marginal improvements in performance, or is it to really understand your audiences, your customers, your partners intimately? You can't deliver value if you don't know what the audience actually values. And I think that one of the things that has happened over the last decade or so is a lot of brands and companies have invested a lot in data, but they've invested more in leasing that data than in actually acquiring it, owning it, and having that relationship one-to-one with their customers, as opposed to through a proxy, whether it be Facebook or Google or some other data provider. And I think that that's something that over the next few years, I think really has to change, because if we've learned anything, is that trust is definitely on the decline in terms of big tech platforms. It's certainly not costing them audience. They still have huge, populations of people that are using their services. But whether it's through regulation or through, updates that other tech companies are making to privacy options, pretty soon there's going to be less transparency. And we're going to realize that this entire time, the relationship we've had with the audience has been through a pane of glass, through these kind of custodians of that data. And so brands that have really invested in owning those relationships and having that value exchange with their customers, keeping their data safe, keeping their privacy protected, and delivering value in exchange for the information they can gather about them, I think they're going to come out really far ahead. And the brands that are investing now are also going to be farther ahead in the future.
Yeah, and I was going to add, I think that the one thing that we've talked a lot about in McCormick is how do you measure value, and how do you actually validate that you're delivering value and that you're extracting value. And I think from the extracting piece, I mean, in many cases, if something helps you understand the consumer better, you're getting more first-party data that you can interpret and do something with. That is value, but that's a hard thing to put a dollar amount on. And on the consumer side, I think once again, it's not just about a sale, right? It's not just about that last bottom of the funnel, right? We're helping them make the right purchase. It's also about helping them put food on the table, finding new dishes, exploring new things, making healthier decisions, right? As part of their journey. And I think part of that is, from our perspective, being able to test that and listen to the consumer and getting that validation in an agile way, which is not how traditional CPG usually does things, right? Then getting that consumer feedback. We put something out there, it takes 9 months to develop it. We wait for the campaign performance, we wait for the product performance to get that feedback. Like how do we get that in a much more quick way, right? Thinking more like a startup. And I think digital enables that, but it also opens up a lot of doors. Like it can be pulled in so many different directions. So I think that's where establishing a hypothesis on like where do we think the value is, and crystallizing that, and then validating it, and being very, very open to pivoting if the consumer tells us otherwise. And I think that requires both a culture and organizational mind shift. That it's really the value is in the eyes of the beholder, and the consumer oftentimes defines that. And assuming we get that, we then have to figure out like, are we extracting enough value for that to make sense for us as a company?
Great. So now about walled gardens, because we're talking about putting soul into, advertising or whatnot, and the walled gardens, they're bad. That's what everyone, everybody keeps saying. So, but I think that I don't know if that's necessarily the truth. I know that we did a prep call before this, as one would do before a lot of these sessions, and we got into kind of an interesting area where there are benefits, to kind of narrowing it down and picking who your partners are. I know, Megan, you'd actually kind of talked a little bit about how you'd selected 10 versus 120, I think it was, people that you were going to engage with. So can you tell us a little bit about that, and then I'll open it up to the others?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, we like our walled gardens. They're not too bad. On a global level, we have very much cut our digital long tail quite a bit, and we have very strong partnerships, very strong relationships with our walled gardens, so our Facebook and Google. And actually, it's with Google, and interestingly, prior to their recent shift away from the ID, they were working with us to help us create our own data spine within Mondelez, so that we were building up our own reservoir of data. Coming from a place like Mondelez, a CPG, you often don't have that data to any sort of meaningful volume because it sits with the retailers. So this is really, really important for us to be able to move aside from segmenting or personas and really getting into people, really trying to understand the why behind the data to give us the next best action of which to do. We're complementing this across the board as we think about DTC, as we think about Oreo ID and Cadbury gifting and some of those relationships that really give us access to go back to people time and time again. But it's really through that building of our own data set that we're able to get there rather than having to rely on any other sort of external partners across the board. But again, that was actually very much in partnership and by reference of Google, who said to go build it ourselves, and they'll come.
Yeah, and I think the walled gardens, it's reality, right? And we know, and in some cases for good reason, right? The walls are getting higher. So like Megan said, Google and Amazon and the rest, they're great partners for us, right? And I think our push there is like, how do we work with them to create these win-win type scenarios, right? Where we can add value to them, they obviously add value to us to the extent that you can, right? Because I think the other obviously balancing act, and this is true for anyone, them and us, is this balancing between personalization and privacy. But like Megan said, and I mentioned this earlier, like it also means that we can't put all of our eggs in that basket. And especially, like Megan said, we don't have the full funnel of data. And it's very hard for us to parse out what works, not just from an advertising perspective, from a full funnel perspective, like attribution modeling, like what are those interactions that tend to work? And we talk about personalization, like what do we personalize, in a synchronous way, right? So it creates this user journey. And then do we have that real-time capability to then optimize for that, right? So I think, number one, we have to work with our walled gardens. They are our partners. They're not going to go away, but we also have to make sure we build those straight lines of communication. And like we said, this first-party data reservoir. And yeah, we're also using, working with Google on that. So it's a bit ironic to do that, right? But I think as brands, we have to, explore these different avenues to get the best possible data, to make the best possible decisions, to hopefully, improve the experiences and the products that we serve up to our consumers.
This is, as an agency, this is something that we struggled with a lot, especially early on. The digital landscape, it was so fragmented. It was a wild west for a very long time. And so when the duopoly, the Google, Facebook dominance emerged, I think we struggled a lot with like, well, we keep just putting Facebook and Google in front of people. Do we need to divert? Do we need to add more? And so we would partner with other programmatic platforms, but the results were just never there. And I think it was a good reminder. And what we eventually just started telling clients is like, look, variety isn't everything. You have to go where people are spending time and where they're engaging. And the truth is, people spend time within Facebook apps and Google apps, and that's where they're the most engaged. And so, yes, you could be in other places, and it can be an important part of your mix in terms of just being in front of someone. But you do have to do it judiciously. You can't be spread out too thin, and you do have to go to where the most value is. And the truth is, despite all the negative press, all of the hearings, all of the regulation, if the numbers are to say anything, polls aside, people use Facebook, people use Google, they know what they're giving up, and they seem to still trust them for the most part. So I think that, again, you just have to go where people are spending time. You have to go where people are. And so I don't see the walled gardens really, not being a part of the mix or not being good partners anytime soon. I think they're going to continue to be very strong and valuable partners. I just think that the balance in terms of what we get from them versus what we get for ourselves has to kind of start to change. Right. And I say that as an agency, oftentimes we are in the business of providing or being a middleman ourselves. And what we tell our clients is, no, you have to own this relationship. These are your customers. you need to own that relationship more than us and more than any other third party.
Perfect. All right. So I have one last question, and then we're going to get to the actionable insight from each of you. And Jürgen, I think I'm gonna build off what you said. When you're talking about personalization, there's a fine line between being targeted and being creepy. And I think when we had talked about how for example, McDonald's can now, you had mentioned when we were talking earlier about how I could be pulling up and they might know that I want a quarter pounder with cheese, which to me is delightful. Saves me the time of yelling into that thing. But I'll start with you, Jürgen. Tell me a little bit about, the expectation for personalization, how to succeed there, and how that kind of creates this sort of feeling, and bringing it back to the soul of the brand, and how this is actually really an important thing when it comes to engaging and communicating with your customers.
There's surprise and delight, and then there's stalking. And it really is a fine line between the two in terms of how people are going to perceive, an ad or a brand experience that's tailored to you. I think the most important thing is transparency. If I pull up to McDonald's tomorrow and they ask me, "Oh, would you like your usual?" and it comes up on the screen, it's going to weird me out a little bit. I haven't given you my credit card information. I don't have the app downloaded. Like, how would you possibly know that? That kind of passive tracking, I think, is what people really have a problem with. That sense of like, someone's always listening, someone's always watching. I have a conversation about something and suddenly I see ads for it. That's creepy. But if we're forward about it and we say, hey, download the app, enter some information. If you want to go as far as entering your license plate, the next time you pull up to our drive-thru, we'll scan it and we'll be able to have your order ready for you to just go. Heck, we'll even do a separate line for you all. Like, you have the pickup lines at some places. Like, we'll do a separate line. You'll be in and out within a minute. Heck, yeah, sign me up. But that's a choice that I get to make as a consumer. And I'm making it fully informed in terms of what I'm giving you and what I get in return. And I think that's going to be the big shift that we need to see, and that we are starting to see, is a movement away from passive tracking, or what we are comfortable tracking passively, and being more transparent with people about what we want from them so that we can give them something of value in return. And I think that's the piece that's been missing until more recently, until I think more consumers have been speaking up about what they want and what they don't want.
Yeah, I can build on that. I think that's exactly it. It's like, when consumers give us their data, they're giving us value, and what value are we going to offer in return if we're asking for it? And I do think it's a shift from opting out to opting in. So we've had a lot of conversations internally too about being proactive in that communication and putting a stake in the ground to consumers, almost like a consumer bill of rights. I mean, I think Coca-Cola has done a really nice job of doing that, right? Like, very clearly laying out, like, well, here's what you can expect from us. Here's how we're going to be a good partner in this relationship, and value your data and use the data for good, so we improve your experience. And I think that's what we all need to do. We need to be good stewards of their data and use that in positive way that they can see. I think the other challenge with personalization is, and I think we alluded to this earlier, is there is such a thing as over personalization, over targeting. We got to balance that with efficiency, and that's the other thing to look at from a media perspective, from an experience perspective, you name it. What is that? When do you hit that diminishing returns? When do you not offer enough value that makes sense? Because the only way to get personalization scale is to have that efficiency play there, right? So we're constantly tinkering with that. Like, what is that right equation? How do you do right by the consumer, but also doing right by the company, right? And make sure we're making the right investments. In some cases, reach is okay. We have to find that right balance, right? Like, how do we drive, and offer enough relevance for it to make sense?
Yes, and I think that's interesting too, because you can personalize an ad, you can personalize a product, but you can't personalize a brand, right? Because a brand is what it stands for. So that expression becomes a really interesting tipping point, and that necessity that you have to make sure you're giving that creative idea, that brand story, relevance within the messaging, which is so important. On the question of is the juice worth the squeeze? We have been doing a lot around this. One of the biggest changes we've made this year is changing our production model. So globally, we used to work with hundreds and hundreds of production houses around the world. We ran a big pitch process last year, ended up with two incredible partners that we've brought into the table, but have designed the model to really help make sure that even though we were creating an exponential number of assets across touch points, particularly on digital, we were maintaining the quality and capping cost. And it was actually, it's breaking a model that a lot of people felt, wasn't too broken before, but actually shifted our commercials from paying on a cost per asset to more of a retainer-based FTE model, which would help to cap the volume that's happening. And again, increase that quality and consistency across our digital touch points. So for us, because we've been able to sort of figure out the commercial side of it, because we are getting more information about who our consumers are and that sort of data understanding, we do find that it's worth the squeeze, and we're continuing to increase what we now call our empathy at scale penetration year over year. So around 30% this year. So all cool stuff.
Yeah, terrific. So okay, so to rather than do a big in conclusion, I'm going to have everybody give one, actionable insight for everybody at home or wherever you may be to be thinking about as you move forward, and you want to add a little more soul to your digital advertising. And Sam, I'm going to come to you first.
Yeah, and I don't know how actionable it is. I'm going for the inspirational side, but I do think when we talk about intimacy, we talk about relationships, and this might come across as corny, but thinking about like what are the characteristics of someone, person, brand, you name it, that you want to have a relationship with, and to me, I mean, it's things like, we mentioned like honesty, like being genuine, not just taking but giving, right? This mutual value exchange. And being that transparent, that ally, right? And I think that's the litmus test for us as we're thinking about, both from a technical level and a strategic level, like where should we play, where can we add value, but thinking of ourselves as that trusted person, if you will, in terms of characteristics. And I think when you look at specific tactics as well, like is this fitting that? And if not, then we should rethink that.
Great. Megan, what do you think?
Ken, I'm going to steal your line. I think you need to break down your silos to really bring back your soul. And what I mean by that, you can't place digital in a silo. You can't treat it as sort of, a separate entity to your overall comms plan. You need to break down your silos and make sure you have creative media and production sitting together, enabled by data and tech, to really make sure you're capturing the soul and bringing it back to your messaging.
Great. Jürgen?
I'm one of the rare breeds in digital marketing in that I actually have more of an arts background. So I actually started out my career writing for social, writing content. And so I've always been a huge believer in the power of words. And, one of the things I would encourage everyone to do is something that we did at Emory early on and that I've been a champion of throughout my career. Ban the word users. Think about people as people. I think that a lot of the language that we use in digital marketing tends to put up a wall between us and the end audience. And we've seen the repercussions of that in big tech, where they've thought more about the user equation than they have about people's feelings, people's reactions, people's behavior. And I think that as brands, we need to keep that in mind and really always think people first, people centric. And if we start to think of it that way and approach, those relationships the way that we approach our own personal relationships, I think that's where that mutual value can really be built and that intimacy can be nurtured.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much to the panel. It's great having you. Great having this conversation. Look forward to speaking with you more. And I want to thank everybody at home or wherever you may be. Stay safe and make sure to tune into some of our other great stuff. And goodbye for now.